Dolls are pretty divisive. Some people love them, even go as far as collecting them. They're adorable, harmless toys that bring joy. For others though, they are objects of pure terror, with creepy dead eyes that follow you around the room. The star of today's story is definitely an object of terror, but she is none other than the infamous Annabelle, the main character of many films in the Conjuring universe. A doll that's home to a demon that's out for blood and looking for a human host. Now, if you thought that you were safe and that Annabelle was purely a work of fiction, well, you'd be very wrong, because she really does exist, and the true story is more terrifying than you could possibly imagine. Our story takes us to Connecticut. The year is 1917. Two nurses in their 20s, Deirdre and Lara, were living together in a nice, spacious apartment. For Deirdre's 25th birthday, her mum had gifted her an adorable Raggedy Ann doll, colourful and soft with big black eyes and a welcoming smile. Deirdre loved the gift. It brought cheer to her room and it reminded her of her childhood.
Wait a minute, she doesn't look anything like she does in the movies. She doesn't look scary at all.
Yeah, I know, right? The one in the movie looks evil, far too lifelike, caked in makeup with that awful, menacing grin. But actually, I think the real Annabelle is far scarier. There's no way that you'd look at the movie doll and think, you know what? I really want to bring that home with me. The real Annabelle, on the other hand, is cute and friendly looking. You'd never suspect that it was home to something evil. Anyway, every morning before Deirdre left for work, she would make her bed and lovingly place the doll on top, with its arms resting at its sides and its legs pointing straight out. When she returned home, she noticed that the doll had moved slightly. Its legs were crossed at the ankles and its arms were folded in its lap. Strange, she thought, but maybe she'd accidentally nudged the doll on her way out of the room. This would happen over and over again. The doll was always in a different position to what it had been left in. Deirdre was really confused. She asked Lara if she had been moving the doll. But she hadn't. She had always been out at work too. They worked together at the same hospital, you see. The two came up with a little test to check if the doll was really moving. Every morning, they would cross the doll's arms and its legs and see what would happen when they returned home from work. The doll was indeed moving. Every evening when they returned, its arms and legs would be uncrossed, and she'd be contorted into all manner of strange positions. Sometimes it was even as if she was gesturing to something. Then things escalated slightly. The doll started appearing in other rooms of the house, even though Deirdre always left it on her bed, with her bedroom door closed. They'd find it in the kitchen, in the living room, and then in the chair by the front door, kneeling. Now, the doll couldn't stay in a kneeling position on its own. It was soft and floppy and didn't have any joints. Deirdre and Lara even tried to put the doll in this position themselves, but it would just keel over. It was as if an unknown force had been holding it in that position. Lara told her fiancé Cal about how the doll was moving and now it was teleporting to other rooms. He didn't like the sound of this at all. He confessed that the doll had made him uneasy from the start, and now he was convinced that it was a damn voodoo doll. Things would only get creepier. Little notes and messages started to appear around the apartment, written in pencil on parchment paper. The handwriting was messy. It was like a child had written the notes. Even worse, scrawled on the parchment were short, worrying phrases, like "help us" or "help Cal." Who was us and why would Cal need help? Did the person writing the notes know that something was going to happen to him? Or perhaps the notes were a warning? Now, Lara and Deirdre didn't keep parchment paper or pencils in the apartment, so where had the notes come from? They started to think that maybe someone was breaking in and playing some kind of sick joke on them. They looked for evidence of forced entry, but they couldn't see a thing. So, they hatched a plan. They started putting marks on all the windows and the doors. They arranged the furniture and the rugs in such a way that if someone were to break in, they would disturb it. They would leave a trace. The notes continued to appear, and the doll continued to move, but nothing else was ever disturbed. One day when the two came home from work, the doll was sitting on Deirdre's bed. It hadn't moved for months, which was now very unusual. As Deirdre walked towards the doll, a feeling of dread washed over her. And then she saw it. The doll's hands were covered in something red. It looked like blood. There were also 3 distinct droplets of the red substance on the doll's chest. Now, this really scared Deirdre and Lara, and when they told Cal, of course he tried to convince them to get rid of the doll. They didn't listen, though. At the back of their minds, they knew that something wasn't right with the doll, that maybe it was possessed. But for some reason, they just couldn't bring themselves to part with it. I mean, it hadn't done anything to harm anybody. Little did they know that the notes and the droplets of blood on the doll's chest were a sign of what was to come, a warning. 6 weeks went by, and the strange activity continued. It was now Christmas, a time when Deirdre and Lara should have been feeling happy and joyful. But instead, they were worrying about the doll. It consumed their thoughts. There was definitely a presence in the apartment, bringing things, moving things. Very strangely, a boot made out of chocolate appeared on their stereo. Neither of them had bought it, and none of their friends or family had. They couldn't figure out where on earth this boot had come from. Next, they watched in disbelief as one of their statue ornaments lifted into the air, all by itself, before tumbling to the floor. It was at this point that they decided that enough was enough. They would enlist the help of a spiritual medium to try and find out what was in their house. The medium made contact with an entity in the apartment. It was the spirit of a 7-year-old girl called Annabelle Higgins. The girl told them that long before the apartments were built, the land was home to luscious fields where Annabelle would spend many days happily playing. She sadly died very suddenly, and her spirit remained here, roaming the fields and then the apartment complex. Annabelle was desperately lonely. She wanted companionship, and she felt a real connection with those 2 nurses. She could sense that they were compassionate, and she just knew that they would be able to understand her. It was her that was moving the doll. She was moving it to try and get the nurse's attention, and now that she had it, she just wanted to be loved and cared for. She really wanted to stay with Lara and Deirdre, and so she asked for their permission to move in to the doll, to possess the doll. Lara and Deirdre saw no harm in this request. They really wanted to help the sweet little girl, and so they agreed. They gave her permission. After this, the doll was no longer just a doll. She had a name now. She was Sweet Little Annabelle. The nurses showered the doll with even more attention, treating it like it was alive. This was the turning point, because Annabelle now had permission to be there, and the strange activity would take a much darker turn. Cal began to have awful nightmares. They were terrifying and so intense. One night, he fell into a deep sleep. Whilst he was lying there, he saw himself wake up. He felt uneasy and a bit scared, but he didn't know why. He looked around his room. There was nothing out of the ordinary. Everything was as it should be. He then looked down towards his feet, and there was Annabelle, her big black eyes staring up at him. Cal was paralysed with fear. How had the doll gotten into his room? Annabelle began to slowly glide up Cal's body until she reached his chest. She then clamped her arms around Cal's neck and began to choke him. He felt a surge of electricity flow through his entire body as the doll's grip grew tighter and tighter. He couldn't breathe. His body writhed and thrashed about. He tried to push the doll off with all his might, but it was no use. Everything went black, and he awoke the next morning, luckily unharmed it would seem. But this was not just a dream though. He was sure of it. That doll had attacked him.
I'm sorry, but I just can't take this seriously. Annabelle would have won. I would have died from laughter way before her chubby little mitts had started strangling me.
I mean, If I saw this in a film, I admit it would make me laugh. But if it actually happened to me, oh, I certainly wouldn't be laughing. The doll would soon attack again. Cal went to visit Lara at her apartment. Deirdre was out for the evening, so the two were there alone. They sat together in the living room, taking a look at some maps to help Cal prepare for a trip that he was planning for the next day. They started to hear strange noises coming from Deirdre's bedroom, and then a large crashing sound. They thought that maybe someone had broken in, so Cal quietly got up and tiptoed towards Deirdre's bedroom door. He waited outside until the noises stopped, and then he slowly opened the door. He turned on the lights, half expecting to see someone or something, but the room was empty. He noticed that Annabelle was lying on the floor in a corner of the room. So he walked towards her and reached out his hand to touch her. As he did, he felt as if there was a dark presence behind him, watching him. He turned around, but nobody was there. Suddenly there was an intense searing pain across his chest. It felt like he had been branded. He cried out in agony, and Lara quickly rushed to his aid. When she reached the room, Cal was doubled over in pain, trembling, clutching at his chest. She looked on in horror. His shirt was soaked with blood. Lara helped Cal into the living room and sat him down on the sofa. She unbuttoned his shirt and couldn't believe what she was seeing. On his chest were 7 claw marks, 3 vertical and 4 horizontal. Now, the incisions healed rapidly, much quicker than they should have done. Within 2 days, they were gone without trace. It was now clear that whatever was inside Annabelle was not, in fact, a sweet little girl. Oh no, it was something dangerous, something evil. They reached out to a priest that they knew and trusted, Father Kevins, for help. He listened intently to their story. Now this was serious. The entity sounded very powerful, so he contacted Father Everett, who was far more experienced in these matters. Father Everett then decided that he would need to bring in the expertise of Ed Warren, a self-proclaimed demonologist, and Lorraine Warren, a self-proclaimed clairvoyant and light trance medium. The Warrens arrived at the apartment just hours after they received Everett's call. Deirdre led the Warrens into the kitchen, where Lara and Cal were sat in silence. They were drained and exhausted. The three explained to the Warrens what had been happening and showed them the harmless-looking doll, which Ed inspected. Deirdre and Lara told the Warrens that it had just gotten far too much for them. They couldn't cope anymore, so they'd be moving out to escape from whatever it was that had attached itself to the doll. Lorraine claimed that she could sense exactly what had invaded their home. And Ed, well, he had bad news for the nurses. He explained that moving out, well, it wouldn't do a thing. You see, they'd brought an evil entity into their lives, and unfortunately, they wouldn't be able to walk away from it that easily. He explained that Annabelle, she didn't exist. The entity was a trickster and had fooled them into believing that it was a harmless little girl. The teleportation of the doll, the notes, the symbolic drops of blood, and the gestures that the doll was making were all meaningful actions. There was an intent and an intelligence behind the activity. This wasn't the work of a ghost, oh no, but the work of something inhuman. Now you see, apparently a human spirit wasn't capable of producing such intense phenomena. Lara and Deirdre had fallen right into the demon's trap. The demon began moving the doll to get their attention, and once it had it, it fed off this and exploited it. Everything it told the medium was a complete and utter lie, to lull them into a false sense of security, to gain their sympathy and their trust. For the demonic is a liar, the father of lies. Now, their biggest mistake, though, was giving the entity permission to move in to the doll. In doing this, they'd inadvertently given the demon permission to wreak absolute havoc on their lives. it would wear them down until it could reach its ultimate goal: possession. You see, it wanted a human host. Cal was the only one that hadn't been fooled, and now he was a threat to the demon's plans. So it tried to dispose of him by strangling him. When this failed, the entity lashed out again, cutting him with a symbolic claw mark. The Warrens had seen this claw mark time and time again. It was an unmistakable sign of the demonic. Ed explained that demonic entities always followed a pattern, the 4 stages of demonic possession. Currently, they were in the infestation stage of the phenomenon, haunted house type activity where the demon tries to get your attention. But over time, things would have gotten much, much worse. Ed made it clear that if they had waited any longer to get help, they might have all been killed. The Warrens brought in Father Everett to perform an exorcism blessing, a ceremony that would infuse the apartment and those present with the power of God. The priest completed the lengthy blessing and declared that all was well. Lorraine too confirmed that the apartment was free from the demonic entity. Despite these reassurances, Deirdre and the others, quite understandably, did not feel safe around the doll, and so they asked the Warrens to take it, and they agreed. The Warrens left the apartment with the red-haired doll in hand. They strapped it into the back seat of their car and began their journey home. But they chose only to take the back roads, just in case the entity was still tied to the doll. And my goodness, it's a good job that they did. They started to have serious car trouble. Each time there was a bend in the road, the power steering and the brakes would fail, causing many near collisions. The entity, it wanted them dead. 3 times their car would stall, and Ed finally pulled over, took out a vial and doused the doll with holy water. This seems to do the trick, because the car trouble, it stopped, and the Warrens arrived home, safe and sound. Ed placed the doll on a chair in his office. Over the next few days, it could frequently be seen levitating, and over the coming weeks, it began appearing in different parts of the house. One evening, Lorraine returned home alone and heard loud growls reverberating throughout the entire house. This really terrified her. Annabelle was certainly nothing to be trifled with. During a visit to the Warrens, a Catholic priest asked Ed about the new adorable little doll sitting in his office. Ed told him the story behind her. Now, the priest clearly didn't take it seriously though, because he picked up the doll and said, "Ha! It's just a ragdoll, Annabelle. It can't hurt anything," before tossing it back onto the chair. Ed warned him not to mock the doll because she was home to a very dangerous entity. As the priest was leaving, Lorraine rushed after him and told him to please be careful driving home. It wasn't long before the Warrens received a telephone call from the priest asking why Lorraine had asked him to be careful. She responded that she knew his car would go out of control, that he would have an accident. And it would turn out that Lorraine was right. The brake system in his car had indeed failed. He was almost killed and his car was now a complete wreck. Later that year, the Warrens were hosting a large get-together. Lorraine and one of the guests, Father Daniels, were chatting together in a room, with Annabelle sitting close by. Suddenly, a large boar's tooth necklace above them just violently exploded. The other guests rushed into the room to see what all the commotion was about. One of the guests quickly took a picture, and it's claimed that when it was developed, there were 2 beacons of light above the doll, pointing right in the direction of Father Daniels. The Warrens eventually decided that it was far too dangerous to have Annabelle just lying about. She needed to be locked up for good. They commissioned a special case made out of glass and wood for the doll. They inscribed it with various prayers, and on the front they placed a clear warning. Her home would now be the Warrens Occult Museum. Now, the doll's reign of terror, it was still not over yet. A visitor to the museum began banging on Annabelle's case, taunting her, telling her to scratch him and prove that she was real. On his way home, he reportedly lost control of his motorcycle and crashed into a tree. He didn't make it out alive. His girlfriend survived though, but was hospitalised for a year. Allegedly, at the time of the accident, the two had been laughing and making fun of Annabelle. Sadly, the Warrens have now both passed away, but their legacy lives on to Ed's protege, Tony Spearer, and he now looks after the museum. To this day, Annabelle remains in the Warrens Occult Museum, under lock and key. But even this isn't enough to keep the demon at bay. A priest frequently comes to bless Annabelle with prayers that bind evil. Some even say that they've seen her moving around her case, attempting to break free.
Wait, they kidnap occult creatures and bind them with prayers? I don't like the sound of that. I won't let them take me.
Don't worry, Gargi, you're safe. No one's coming to take you away. So, is the story of Annabelle true or just a complete fabrication? Well, the jury's out. Annabelle's victims never came forward with their stories, and their names vary depending on which account you read. Now, there's a lot of controversy surrounding the Warrens. Some believe that they're the real deal, while others believe that they're dangerous frauds. With the Annabelle story, all we have to go on is the Warrens' word, and there's no other real compelling evidence. Cal being strangled might have been an episode of sleep paralysis. Many people experience hallucinations during these, and also the feeling of pressure on the chest. But what about all the other things that happened? Well, a lot of the other details could be explained by someone playing a prank that went too far and just got really out of hand. Even so, I certainly didn't want to ever come face to face with Annabelle. And if I did, I definitely wouldn't want to make her angry. What do you think, Gargi? 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 Gargi, no! What are you doing?
I won't let them take me.